First Samuel chapter 1 Introduction. This chapter gives us a beautiful story of a faithful mother in Israel named Hannah who shows her gratitude to God for reversing her barrenness and giving her a child miraculously. It also shows how God, in faithfulness to his promise, blesses those who have faith in him. Elkanah was a bigamist, a marital status forbidden by God. However, Elkanah loved Hannah dearly and gave her special consideration. Though barrenness seemed to be a matter of family struggle in the start of the chapter, the same problem had been turned to submission and trust in God towards the end. God turns barrenness to birth and complaint to thanksgiving. Israel's state is symbolically compared to Hannah. Both Hannah's future and Israel's future begin in weakness and need and move toward power and well being. Verse 1. Elkanah is described as a certain man. In other words, his identity doesn't matter except for his relationship to the story's main character. God's strategic way to carry out his plan is to find out a certain man and work through him. Here, there is a list of Elkanah's family. His parentage is given to the fifth generation. This probably means that he was a man of noble descent. Elkanah, a Zophite, was a descendant of Zoph, and his family line shows he was a Levite. 1 Chronicles 6:16-30. He is called an Ephraimite not because he was of the tribe of Ephraim, but because his family lived in a Levitical city in the boundaries of Ephraim. That is, Elkanah was an Ephraimite by residence, but a Levite by birth. 1 Chronicles 6:33-38. The town of Ramathaim also had the name Ramathaim Zophim or Ramah. It was about 8 kilometers, about 5 miles northwest of Jerusalem. Verse 2. Elkanah had 2 wives. Polygamy was a fact of life in the ancient world. According to Genesis 2:24, Matthew 19:8, 1 Timothy 3:2 and Malachi 2:15, the Bible never puts polygamy in a favorable light. Strife and conflict always categorize polygamous families in the Bible. Elkanah practices bigamy, which was contrary to God's design of marriage. His 2 wives are Hannah and Peninnah. From Peninnah he received children, but Hannah was barren. Verse 3. Elkanah was so godly that he kept up his attendance at God's altar, notwithstanding the unhappy differences in his family. Division in the family did not stop his devotion to God. He followed the law of Moses and traveled annually to worship and sacrifice to the Lord of hosts at Shiloh. Shiloh was the location of the tabernacle during the years from Joshua until David. It was about 24 kilometers, around 15 miles east of Ramah. This is the first time that the Bible calls God by this name, the Lord of hosts. The hosts are the armies of the sovereign God, and this name expresses the infinite resources and power at God's disposal as he fights for his people. Eli's 2 sons, Hophni and Phinehas, the priests of the Lord, were there. These priests are mentioned by name because they were known as notoriously wicked priests. 1 Samuel 2:17-24. Even during the worst periods of Israel's history, it seems that a few people remain loyal to God. God used those few people to rescue the nation and to carry out his purposes. Those few people mattered more in God's plan than all the people who were not loyal to him. Such a man was Elkanah, who still continued to serve God in a loyal manner. Verse 4. As Elkanah brought his family each year to the tabernacle for sacrifice, he ate a ceremonial meal at the tabernacle with his family. Elkanah was a decent provider to his family, giving their allotted portions to his wives and their children. Verse 5. He showed his sympathy, favor, and love to Hannah by giving her a double portion of the ceremonial meal. Elkanah loved Hannah although she could not have a son for him. Hannah is at the house of the Lord with a blessed double portion in front of her, but she could not enjoy it because the Lord had closed her womb. Since in Deuteronomy 7:12-14, God told the Israelites that they would have children if they obey His laws, women in the Old Testament believed that a woman's inability to bear children was not just a natural handicap but also a curse from God. Verse 6. In verses 5 and 6, we are told twice that the Lord had closed Hannah's womb. Beyond Hannah's painful trial, there was a purpose of God. God used the trial of a closed womb to accomplish something great in her life and to further the whole plan of salvation. Even though things were hard, God was still in charge. Much like with Hagar and Sarah, Peninnah resented her husband's favoritism directed toward Hannah. She mocked and tormented Hannah over her lack of children. Peninnah, her rival, may have accused Hannah of some sin in her life that had apparently brought God's curse on her. She provoked her and mocked at Hannah's hope in the Lord, thus irritating her. Verse 7. Elkanah, on the occasion of every yearly visit to the house of the Lord at Shiloh, was in the habit of publicly giving the childless Hannah the double gift to show his undiminished love. But Peninnah, the happier mother of children, every year chose this solemn occasion of offering thank offering before the tabernacle to taunt the childless Hannah for her barrenness. Though in a festival where everyone ate and celebrated, Hannah wept and would not eat. Because of the conflict between the two wives, Hannah could not enjoy the display of love and favor from Elkanah. Verse 8. Although Peninnah was cruel to Hannah, Elkanah himself was kind to Hannah. Her sorrowful spirit disturbed him who loved her in particular and inquired about her grief. But still, Hannah felt deeply sad. Elkanah's love was not enough. She strongly desired to have a son. Here we see Elkanah's questions, which has why 3 times, showing his own value to Hannah. 1. Why are you weeping? 2. Why don't you eat? 3. Why are you downhearted? He flippantly asks, isn't having him as a husband better than 10 sons? Elkanah was careful to observe some of the statutes in the Mosaic law, such as worshipping God yearly at Shiloh. However, he seems to have been somewhat insensitive to the depth of Hannah's suffering as a barren woman and to the destructive interaction between his wives. He did not recognize that she had needs he could not fulfill. Hannah is deeply needy and immobilized, and her husband is helpless. The family system seems desperately closed. The only opening is that every year Elkanah goes up to sacrifice to God, that is, to the very one who had closed Hannah's womb. Verse 9. This was the solemn sacrificial meal at which the whole family were present. Finished eating and drinking. These words simply mean that Hannah took part in this banquet, though she did so without appetite or pleasure. To take part in this banquet was a duty, but as soon as she had fulfilled it, she withdrew to the temple to pour out her grief before God. There, Eli the priest, that is, the high priest, a descendant of Ithamar, the younger son of Aaron, see 1 Chronicles 24:3, was seated, as is said in Numbers 27:2, upon the seat placed at the doorpost leading into the inner court of the tabernacle, where all who came to worship at the Lord's house passed. This high priestly judge sat here at certain times to administer justice and to transact business. The Lord's house is the earthly place where at times the visible glory of the eternal King of Israel was pleased to manifest itself. Verse 10. Hannah was desperate when she prayed. She knew that God was the only person who could help her. She considered the mercy of our God who knows the troubled soul. Prayer in the ancient world was usually audible. Psalm 3:4, 4:1, 6:9, and Daniel 6:10-11. But Hannah's was a burdened and earnest, inaudible prayer. She mingled tears with her prayer. Verse 11. Hannah articulates her plea, which she fortifies with a vow. The depth of her trouble was so manifest in the crowding together of the words in which Hannah poured out the desire of her heart before God. She showed her earnestness in the threefold repetition of the entreaty that the Almighty Lord would 1. Look on her misery, 2. Remember her, 3. Not forget her. In her prayer, she mentions the need of that special good thing, a son, whom she needed and desired. With her prayer, she also makes a twofold vow in case her request of having a son is granted. 1. She pledged the son to the service of the eternal Lord all the days of his life. 2. Her son would be a Nazirite for all the days of his life. She dedicated him completely to God, not just by profession but also by conviction. The child was already dedicated as a Levite by birth because God regarded the tribe of Levi as his own special possession. But the time of a Levite's special dedication to the Lord only lasted from the age of 30 to 50. Numbers 4:2-3. Hannah took something that already belonged to the Lord and gave it again to him in a greater way, for the whole life, and in the dedication of a Nazirite, which was a greater consecration than a Levite. As said in Numbers chapter 6, 2-8, Naziriteship included three things. 1. Refraining from intoxicating drinks, signifying the distance from all fleshly pleasures. 2. Avoiding all ceremonial defilement by corpses, even of the nearest kin, because the dead show the corruption and the fruit of sin. 3. No use of razor to cut the hair, but letting the hair grow, because this is a visible sign to others of the vow. Hannah was essentially bargaining away the companionship of her son and trading away the very thing she requested most, because she wanted to honor God for his favor. Hannah's prayer was desperate, but her promise was sincere. Her attitudes had changed. She no longer wanted a son in order to please herself and her husband. Instead, she desired the honor of the Lord more than simply gaining relief from her rival. Her personal relationship with God increased. Verse 12. She continued praying. Hannah's prayer was long, desperate, and earnest, but in silence. Hereby she testified her belief of God's knowledge of her heart and its desires. Hannah took those bitter and anguished feelings to God honestly in prayer. It was an inward supplication which only her heart and God heard. Eli watched and observed her mouth. Eli was Israel's chief priest. He was an old man and he was a weak man. He watched Hannah but was unable to recognize the true nature of Hannah's prayer. In those days, silent prayer was something unusual.